500. One Piece facts to fall asleep to sleep. Channel script, TTS. Ready, target. 17,000 plus words. Boring pirate formula. 11 labs. There is a world beneath the world you know. Not the Grand Line, not the New World, not the red line that divides the oceans into four, though all of those will come. Something deeper than geography. A world of details that Oda placed into the story without announcement. Of rules that govern the sea and its people without ever being written down. Of facts so embedded in the fabric of the narrative that they stopped being visible the moment they became familiar. Folded into the background of a story so large that any single reading can only ever be a partial account of what is actually there. Tonight we go through 500 of them. Slowly, one at a time, from the beginning. There is no hurry. The night is long enough. 500 facts about a world whose most important facts are still coming, and whose smallest facts, the ones that passed unnoticed in the corner of a panel, or in a single line of expository dialogue, turn out, when you stop and hold them to the light, to be the ones worth carrying. Welcome. If you are new here, I am glad you found this. If you have come back from another night, I am glad you returned. Wherever tonight finds you, whatever room you have settled into, whatever quiet you are borrowing from the hours that the world has not yet claimed, let yourself get comfortable. And if at some point, while we are moving through this, you would like to subscribe so that we can do this again, you are more than welcome to. There is no pressure in either direction. There is never any pressure here. Let us begin. One Piece's world is a single ocean. That is the first fact and the one that contains all the others. Not a collection of separate seas arbitrarily placed beside each other. Not a world of distinct bodies of water that happen to share a horizon, but a single continuous ocean that encircles the globe, divided by a single geological feature whose existence reshapes everything it touches. The red line is a continent, not a mountain range, not a ridge of elevated land, but a wall of stone that rises from the seafloor and reaches into the atmosphere, encircling the planet in a complete ring. Dividing the ocean, it passes through into four distinct bodies of water that become what the story calls the Four Blues. The East Blue, where Luffy grows up, and where Nami was held, and where Zoro trained, and where the story begins. The West Blue, where Brook was born, and where Sanji trained, and where Boa Hancock spent enough time that it touched her history. The North Blue, where Law was born, and where Rocinante died in the snow with a child in his arms, and where Don Quixote do Flamingo began the long project of becoming what he became. The South Blue, where Frankie's story begins, where Jewelry Bonnie was born, where the edges of the world that Luffy has not yet reached are still waiting for him. The Four Blues are distinct ecosystems. The specific fish, weather, sea currents, and marine life of each blue differ enough from each other that an experienced sailor can identify which blue they are in without any navigational instrument, simply by what they encounter in the water around them. This is not an incidental detail. It is the story's way of establishing that the four oceans are genuinely separate environments, shaped by whatever created the current geography of the world. Whatever event 800 years ago divided what was once continuous into four distinct bodies that have been developing their own character ever since. They are not the same ocean under different names. They are four oceans that remember, through their fish and their weather and the specific quality of their current, what they were before they were separated. The Grand Line runs perpendicular to the Red Line, crossing it at 2 points and dividing the Four Blues into their upper and lower halves. The result is a world that looks, when mapped, like a globe divided into 4 quadrants by 2 perpendicular lines. The red line running around the circumference and the Grand Line crossing it at 90 degrees. The Grand Line is not simply a dangerous sea. It is a magnetically unstable one. Ordinary compasses are useless in the Grand Line because the magnetic fields generated by its islands are strong enough to override the compass needle, pulling it toward the nearest island's specific magnetic signature rather than any fixed north. This is why log poses exist. A log pose is a navigational instrument that measures the magnetic field of the island it is currently pointing toward, locking onto that island's specific signature, holding its needle in that direction until enough time has passed for it to register the next island's field and transfer its allegiance. The time a log pose needs to lock onto a new island varies. Some islands can be locked in hours. Others require days or weeks. The log pose's patience is the island's character expressed as a number, how long the island insists on being known before it will point you toward the next thing. In the New World, the second half of the Grand Line, the magnetic fields are strong enough that a single log pose cannot survive them. 3 log poses must be worn simultaneously, their needles offering 3 different directional readings, and the navigator's skill becomes the ability to read the relationship between 3 competing signals rather than the certainty of one. Navigation in the New World is not a question of following a fixed bearing. It is a question of interpreting disagreement, of reading what 3 different instruments say and extracting from the disagreement the one path that is actually survivable. The navigator who can do this lives. The navigator who cannot does not reach the end. The calm belt flanks the Grand Line on both sides, 2 stretches of ocean characterized by the total absence of wind and current. A sailing ship that enters the calm belt stops moving and stays stopped. The sea kings who populate the calm belt are not simply large. The largest confirmed specimens measure in hundreds of meters, long enough that a ship could mistake one for an island at a distance, wide enough to swallow the ship before the mistake was corrected. They are the calm belt's natural enforcement mechanism, as effective as any wall and more terrifying than most. The world government circumvents this problem by coating the hulls of marine ships with sea stone, which produces the same energy as the sea's surface and makes the ships invisible to sea-king perception. This circumvention requires sea stone. Sea stone requires production and supply. The supply chain is the government's structural vulnerability, quietly established years before the story made it narratively relevant. Reverse Mountain is the Grand Line's primary entrance point, a geographical impossibility that the story presents without apology. At Reverse Mountain, 4 rivers, 1 from each blue, flow upward against gravity and converge at the summit before pouring down together into the Grand Line on the other side. A ship entering must catch one of these upward rivers, ascending to the summit on the river's current, and then descending into the sea beyond. The physics of this are not explained. The phenomenon simply is as established as the existence of sea kings or the instability of Grand Line compasses. The impossibility is part of the statement the Grand Line makes about itself. It begins where the rules of ordinary navigation end. Mary-Jouez sits atop the red line at the point where the Grand Line crosses it, positioned at the literal center of the world's geography, elevated above every ocean and every island in the world. The city is not visible from the sea. The red line's height places it beyond what any sailor on the water can see or easily reach without specific mechanical assistance. It was not placed there randomly. The people who built their authority at the top of the world understood that height communicates authority, that the specific experience of looking down at everything produces, over centuries, the naturalized assumption that looking down is natural, that the arrangement of power and landscape is the arrangement of things as they should be. Mary-Geoise is a political argument built into the world's physical structure, and the argument has been running, largely unchallenged, for 800 years. The Sky Islands exist above the cloud layer, at altitudes that ordinary ships cannot reach without specific assistance. Sky Piea, the Sky Island the crew visits, sits atop a cloud formation called White Sea, which sits atop White Sea, both existing above the standard cloud layer. The soil of Sky Islands, called Verth, is ordinary dirt existing at altitude, which should be impossible and which the story accepts as simply true. A knock-up stream is an underwater geyser that builds pressure in the ocean floor and releases it in a vertical column powerful enough to launch a ship from the sea surface to the cloud layer in seconds. Hitting the knock-up stream at the wrong angle destroys the ship. Hitting it correctly sends the ship upward in a trajectory that lands it on the sea of clouds above. The violence of the ascent is not dramatized as unusual by the crew. In the Grand Line, it is navigation. The All Blue is Sanji's dream and the story's most specific geographic promise. It is the place where the currents of all four blues converge, where the fish of every ocean can be found in the same water, where the marine biology of the world becomes fully continuous. Given the story's confirmation that the world was once a single landmass, before whatever happened at the end of the Void Century broke the geography into its current shape, the All Blue is not a legend. It is a memory. It is the name that the ocean uses when it remembers what it used to be. Before the separation, before the Void Centuries event made four blues out of one ocean. The four blues are the separated pieces. The All Blue is where the separation was not complete. Sanji is sailing toward the world's memory of itself. Now let us talk about what grows in this ocean. Let us talk about the devil fruits. A devil fruit should not exist. It grows in colors that no natural fruit produces, swirled and patterned in ways that mark it as outside ordinary plant biology, something the world generated through a mechanism the story has been slowly revealing, but not yet fully explained. Each fruit contains a specific power, single and complete, that transfers entirely from the fruit to the person who takes the first bite. The power does not grow in gradually. It arrives fully formed, and eating a second devil fruit kills the user. The reason has been theorized, but not confirmed in the current canon. It is one of the facts the story holds deliberately, a question it has positioned centrally and is moving toward answering at its own pace. There are three categories: the paramachia, which alter the body or allow the user to produce, manipulate, or become a specific substance or effect. Luffy's rubber body, Doflamingo's strings, Big Mum's soul extraction, Law's surgical space, all paramachia. The category is the largest and most varied, containing every fruit power that is neither elemental transformation nor animal transformation. The Zoan, which allow the user to transform into an animal or a hybrid of human and animal, producing physical enhancements calibrated to the nature of the animal. The Logia, which allow the user to become the element they represent, to dissolve into it entirely, to let physical attacks pass through a body that is no longer solid in any conventional sense. Logia users are effectively untouchable by conventional physical attacks unless the attacker uses Haki, which disrupts the elemental transformation and allows the attack to make contact. The fundamental reason Haki matters, as much as it does in the story's power system, is Logia existence. Logia created the need for Haki to be learned. Every devil fruit is unique. There is no second of any fruit in existence at any given time. When a user dies, the power reincarnates into the nearest available fruit of any kind, converting it. This is confirmed through two specific events in the story. The fruit that appeared near the site of Smiley's dissolution, the chemical weapon that Punk Hazard produced, received the axolotl Zoan power from the weapon's death. The Mera Mera no Mi, Ace's fruit, surfaced as the prize at the Corrida Coliseum in Dressrosa, not long after Ace's death at Marineford. The power of Ace's fire having travelled outward from his body and found the nearest vessel. The power looking for a new bearer. The will in its most literal and mechanical form, refusing to end with the person who last held it. Devil fruit users cannot swim. The sea rejects them, pulling away their ability to use their power and rendering them immobile in water that the rest of the world floats in without difficulty. The story describes this as the sea treating them as foreign objects, the ocean's response to a body that has been altered away from its natural relationship with water. A devil fruit user who enters the ocean is immediately vulnerable, regardless of how exceptional they are elsewhere. The power that makes them exceptional on land or on a ship's deck becomes irrelevant the moment they are in the water. For people who choose a life at sea, this is a specific and peculiar trade, more powerful in every other environment, helpless in the one environment that is everywhere. They live on the ocean and cannot enter it. Sea stone is a naturally occurring mineral that emits the same energy as the sea's surface, producing the same weakening effect through contact rather than immersion. It neutralizes devil fruit powers on contact. The handcuffs used to restrain captured devil fruit users are made from it. Prison cells that hold them are lined with it. Marine ships' hulls are coated with it. Sea stone is produced in Wano, which creates a supply chain dependency that the story converts into a political argument at the Wano arc's conclusion. The government's primary mechanism for controlling devil fruit users depends entirely on a supply chain running through a country, whose liberation the story's protagonist just completed. Luffy, freeing Wano, did not simply liberate a country. It changed who controls what the government uses to control the sea. Awakening is the state beyond mastery. Most devil fruit users spend their lives at the power's original scope, developing proficiency and creative application within the fruit's established parameters. Awakening is what happens when the relationship between user and power deepens past that boundary. For paramecia users, awakening allows the power to extend beyond the user's body and affect the surrounding environment. Doflamingo's awakening converted everything around him in Dressrosa into strings when he used it. Katakuri's awakening let him transform the environment into mochi. For Zoan users, awakening produces enhanced physical recovery, the ability to regenerate from damage at a rate standard Zoan cannot match. The jailer beasts of Impel Down are awakened Zoan users, their transformations permanent. Their recovery accelerated enough that ordinary injury does not accumulate against them in any conventional way. For Logia users, awakening remains less fully defined in the story's current state. It is one of the categories remaining unknown facts. The Zoana subcategories extend beyond the standard. Ancient Zoan model extinct species, animals the world no longer contains, whose forms the fruit preserves in defiance of the biology and time that eliminated them from the living world. Queen's Pteranodon form, Ulti's Pachycephalosaurus form, X-Drake's Allosaurus form. Ancient Zoan grant physical capabilities calibrated to extinct animals whose forms were, in many cases, larger and more dangerous than anything currently living. Mythical Zoan model creatures that never existed in the natural world at all, drawing not from biology but from belief, from the accumulated weight of human mythology, from the specific quality of a creature that lives only in the imagination, and that has, through the imagination, become more present in the world than many things that actually exist. The Hito no Mi model Nika is a mythical Zoan, the rarest category of the rarest type. Luffy has spent the entire story carrying the most exceptional fruit in the classification system, misnamed, hidden, available to anyone who happened to open an unlocked chest on a pirate ship. He did not seek it. He never knew what he had. The power found the person before the person understood what had found them. Now let us talk about the force that exists in every living being. Let us talk about Haki. Haki is the manifestation of life force as will. It exists in everyone without exception. Distributed through every creature the story acknowledges as alive. What is not distributed is the ability to use it consciously. That ability requires the specific combination of circumstances that force a person past every ordinary limit, or the kind of training that only someone who has already passed those limits can transmit. Most people live their entire lives without their Haki ever being deliberately used. It emerges, sometimes involuntarily, in moments of extreme stress or determination or need, the will overflowing before the person is aware they have will to overflow. The first time Luffy used Conqueror's Haki, it was involuntary. He was surrounded by enemies at Marineford. It happened. The enemies fell. He continued without fully understanding what he had done. Observation, Haki, the Kenbun Shoku Haki, extends perception past the range and accuracy of the ordinary senses. At its basic level, it allows the user to feel the presence and emotional state of others, to sense people beyond walls, to register the intent behind an incoming attack a moment before the attack arrives. A sufficiently developed user of observation Haki cannot be approached by surprise. They feel the approach before any physical signal confirms it. At its advanced form, observation Haki becomes future sight, a perception that reads slightly forward in time, seeing what is about to happen rather than only what is currently happening. The future that advanced observation Haki shows is not fixed. It is probabilistic, showing the most likely immediate future given the current state of every element the user can perceive. Katakuri's future sight was the most refined the story demonstrated at the time of Whole Cake Island, capable of reading seconds ahead with enough clarity to respond to attacks before they were thrown. Luffy, developing future sight during their fight, was the specific mechanism by which a winnable gap appeared in a defense that had previously been gapless. Armament Haki, the Busoshoku Haki, hardens the body or objects held by the body through the projection of will as physical force. It makes the user or their weapon capable of contacting Logia users who would otherwise be untouchable. It makes hardened surfaces more resistant to incoming attacks. The visual sign of armament Haki is the darkening of the affected area, the skin or weapon turning a color between black and dark purple, the hardness visible as a texture change, ordinary human material converted into something with more density and more resistance. At advanced level, armament Haki can be projected through an attack into the interior of what it strikes, bypassing surface hardness entirely, destroying from within. Rayleigh demonstrates this against a Sea King at Sabaody Archipelago, ending the creature through internal force rather than surface impact. Luffy develops it against Kaido in Wano, the repeated encounters with a body whose surface could not be penetrated, teaching him to reach past the surface itself. Conqueror's Haki, the Haoshoku Haki, is the overflow of will, the third type, belonging only to people born with the specific quality of spirit that produces it. Fewer than 1 in several million people have the capacity. In people who have it, it manifests first involuntarily, the will becoming so intense in a moment of need that it projects outward and renders unconscious everyone nearby, whose own will cannot withstand the pressure. The discharge is not selective. Before training, it drops friend and foe equally. Training produces the control that makes it targeted rather than comprehensive. Advanced Conqueror's Haki allows coating of attacks with the will directly, infusing strikes with the full pressure of the user's spirit in a way that the story reserves for the fewest exceptional fighters in history. Roger, Kaido, and Luffy are confirmed among those capable of it. The category is very small. The voice of all things sits adjacent to observation Haki, but extends past its boundary. It is the ability to hear what the world says when it is speaking, the voices of beings that do not communicate through any ordinary language, the testimony of ancient stones carved to transmit information to whoever could receive it. Roger had it. He heard the poneglyphs differently from how Odin read them, the hearing preceding the translation, the communication arriving before the language carrying it. Luffy hears Zunesha without seeking the conversation. He hears the Sea Kings at Fishman Island. He receives the weight of what the poneglyphs contain without Odin's access to the ancient language, the emotional truth of what was stored in the stone reaching him before the words do. The voice of all things is the story's oldest form of perception, predating every structured power system connected to Joy Boy, and to whatever it means to be the person capable of completing what Joy Boy left unfinished. Now let us talk about the institutions. Let us talk about how the current world is maintained. The world government is a coalition of 170 nations. The majority of the world's inhabited territory and population belongs to this coalition, making operating outside it, as pirates do and as Wano did, not simply illegal, but a statement of fundamental opposition to the world order itself. The coalition was founded 800 years ago by 20 kings who formed an alliance during the Void Century, fought a war against a kingdom that opposed their vision, won, and built their victory into institutions whose primary function across every subsequent century has been to maintain the conditions of that original victory. The institutions have evolved. The function has not changed. The 5 elders, the Gorosei, are the world government's highest visible governing body. 5 individuals who have occupied their positions for long enough that the story presents them as permanent features of the political landscape rather than officials serving a term. They answer to Im. Im is the actual occupant of the empty throne, the person sitting in the seat that the world government's founding mythology established as empty, as a symbol that no single person rules the world. Im occupies it. The Gorosei serve Im. The public governance of the world government is the performance of a collaborative institution that is, at its foundation, a monarchy, and the monarchy is Im, whose capacity for destruction, demonstrated at Lulusia Kingdom and implied at historical God Valley, exceeds anything previously attributed to a single entity in the story. What Im is, how Im has existed long enough to be present at the world government's founding, and still present in the story's current era, is part of the answer the Egghead arc has begun delivering. The Marines are organized with a fleet admiral at the head, below whom sit 3 admirals whose individual capabilities are designed to function as the government's highest operational assets, each one considered individually capable of engaging an emperor-level threat. The admiral's system is not primarily about force. It is about what the deployment of force communicates. That the government has assessed a situation as requiring commitment of its most exceptional resources. An admiral arriving is a statement. Below the admirals sit the vice-admirals, numerous enough to staff buster calls and major operations that require exceptional force distributed across a battlefield, rather than concentrated in a single location. The system continues downward, through rear admirals and commodores and captains, and the full rank structure of an institution that has been building its hierarchy for 800 years. Cipher Pol, IGES 0, CP0, does not officially exist. Its agents wear white masks. They operate on behalf of the world nobles through no chain of command that the standard governmental hierarchy can access or interfere with. They appeared at Dressrosa during Doflamingo's fall, at Wano during the conflict with Kikido, at Egghead during the government's move against Vegapunk. They are the hand that the head that does not officially exist extends into the world, and the non-official existence is itself a fact about how the world government governs, through acknowledged structures and through structures it cannot acknowledge, through layers of deniability that allow the institution to claim no responsibility for what its own agents do. The Reverie convenes every 4 years, bringing the kings and queens of the world's nations to Mary Joieuse, for a summit whose agenda is shaped by the world government, and whose decisions, nominally collaborative, reflect the institution's own requirements. The most recent Reverie produced the dissolution of the warlord system on Fujitora's recommendation, the assassination of King Cobra of Alabasta, following a question he asked the Gorosei about the Nefertari family's relationship to the world government's founding, and events involving Vivi and Im, whose full nature the story has not yet completed explaining. What Cobra asked, and why asking it was sufficient to make him a target, is part of the answer. The story is still constructing around the Nefertari family's specific position in the world's history. The warlord system placed 7 pirates into a formal alliance with the government, each receiving amnesty for prior crimes in exchange for military service when required. The system's value was threefold. It neutralized powerful pirates who would otherwise be threats. It used those pirates as deterrents against other pirate activity, and it gave the government assets it could deploy without formal military commitment. The cost was the legitimation of piracy as a category, the implicit acknowledgement that powerful pirates exist and must sometimes be co-opted rather than defeated. Fujitora's argument was that this cost had outweighed the benefit, that a justice system maintained partly by allying with criminals was a justice system that had already compromised its foundational claim. The kings agreed. The system ended. The former warlords dispersed into positions the story is still accounting for. Now let us talk about the 4 people who held the world's power in equilibrium before this story began. The 4 emperors are not an institution with a formal process of entry. They are an acknowledgement of power reality. 4 pirates whose individual strength and territorial control is so significant that other world powers treat them not as threats to be neutralized through conventional means, but as forces to be navigated, the way weather systems are navigated, with attention to what they actually are, rather than what it would be convenient for them to be. The title is assigned by the world's awareness. The world's awareness is usually correct about who deserves it. Whitebeard was the world's strongest man. The story assigned him this title directly and defended it through the record of his career. He had never lost a one-on-one fight. His crew numbered over 1,600 direct members and commanded the loyalty of 43 allied crews, a combined force whose scale Sengoku placed at a national military's equivalent. His Gura Gura no Mi, the Tremor Tremor fruit, is described by Sengoku in his Marineford broadcast as having the power to destroy the world, which is a claim made by the Fleet Admiral in the most formal possible setting, and which is therefore not hyperbole but official government assessment. At Marineford, Whitebeard generated a tsunami from open water, large enough that Aokiji had to freeze the entire bay to stop it. The power was literal, and it was large, and the man who held it used it at the end of his life, not to conquer, but to protect, aimed at saving the sons who were dying around him, which is perhaps the truest statement about his character. His power was always the expression of his nature, and his nature was paternal, and the paternal was everything. Big Mum's territory of Toto Land comprised 35 islands, and Whole Cake Island at their center. Each island themed around a food, populated by the races she collected across decades of diplomatic marriages and military campaigns. She wanted representatives of every race in the world within her territory. The collection was systematic, and the invitation was coercive. Refusal was not the kind of thing allies survived easily. Her soul fruit extracts soul fragments from people who feel fear, converting the fear into something she can place into objects, giving them life and personality and the specific kind of loyalty that comes from belonging to someone who gave you existence and can take it back. The fear is the payment. The living world she created from it is the receipt. Kaido's beasts pirates were built on the Smile project, the artificial Zoan fruit production line that required Caesar Clown's chemical expertise to produce Saidi, Doflamingo's operation to manage the supply chain, and Kaido's army to receive the product. The Smile fruits had a 30% success rate. The remaining 70% of users gained only the inability to swim and a permanent compulsion to smile, regardless of their actual emotional state. The forced smile, sitting on faces that had every reason to express something else. The specific cruelty of removing the ability to communicate genuine suffering from people who had been given enough to suffer about. Luffy's victory at Dressrosa cut the supply chain. Kaido's army stopped receiving new Smile users. The connection between Dressrosa and Wano is the connection between a supply chain interrupted and the downstream effect of that interruption arriving years later. Kaido himself holds the Uo Uo no Mi, model Seiryu, a mythical Zoan that allows him to transform into the Azure Dragon of legend. His full beast form is large enough to carry buildings, to produce storms by flying through clouds, to occupy a battlefield in a way that makes the battlefield itself feel smaller. The story established him as the world's strongest creature and documented his survival of every execution attempt against him, building him as the ceiling that Luffy's power had to eventually reach and exceed. His durability is not simply high. It is a narrative measurement, the benchmark against which the story's power progression is calibrated. Shanks holds no devil fruit. His authority rests entirely on Haki and the specific quality of his presence, which the story has been documenting through other people's responses to him across the entire run. His arm was given for Luffy's life, and the giving was casual, which is the specific kind of casual that only makes sense if the giver decided long before the moment arrived that the trade was worth making. His full capabilities have not been demonstrated in the manga. Every arc where Shanks appeared, every moment where his name was relevant, every chapter where the story could have shown what he can actually do at his limit, the the withholding continued. The withholding is a fact about the story's construction. Some things are worth more held back than shown. If you are still with me, you are welcome to subscribe before we go deeper. There is more beneath this. There always is. Now let us talk about what was destroyed 800 years ago and why the destruction cannot stay permanent. The Void Century is not the name of a mystery. It is the name of a crime. 100-year period has been removed from the world's accessible history, not through the natural degradation of records over time, but through the deliberate and systematic suppression of every record, every archive, every document that acknowledged what happened during those 100 years. The world government does not simply have no records of it. The government actively prevents anyone from having records of it. Knowledge of the poneglyphs, the only surviving documentation of that period, is classified as a capital offense, not a crime with a sentence, a capital offense. The punishment for knowing is death, applied not only to the person who knows, but, in the case of O'Hara, to the entire island and everyone on it. The Buster Call was sent against an island of scholars because the scholars were reading. The suppression is total. The totality is the measure of what is being suppressed. The poneglyphs are indestructible. The people who made them were making a specific bet that stone capable of surviving anything the winner of the coming war could do, to it would carry the truth forward, through however many centuries the suppression lasted. The bet was correct. The stones survived. The language on them survived in exactly one person after O'Hara burned. Robin has been reading them since childhood, and carries in her mind the ability to receive what the ancient kingdom's craftsmen built specifically to be received by whoever came after the disaster they understood was coming. The poneglyphs are letters. Robin is the intended recipient. The correspondence is 800 years old. The 20 kings who formed the alliance that became the world government moved to Mary Jouaz after their victory and surrendered their original countries to governance by successor families, which is why no celestial dragon descendant rules any current kingdom, and why the Nefertari family is exceptional. They were among the 20 kings. They were invited to ascend, and they declined. They went home to Alabaster. The choice was made 800 years ago and is carried forward in the family's history to Vivi, who is descended from people who, given the choice between elevation and their own people, chose their people. The ancient kingdom opposed the alliance. It built the poneglyphs, knowing the war was coming, distributing them across the world, understanding that distributed truth survives where centralized truth does not, that the record stored in many stones, in many locations, is harder to destroy than the record stored in a single library. O'Hara had gathered knowledge about the ancient kingdom through the specific scholarly process of reconstructing what was destroyed by studying what its destruction left behind. They knew things. The government destroyed them for knowing, and the thing they knew is still in the stones, still in Robin, still moving forward through the story, toward the moment when it is finally stated plainly and the suppression ends. Vegapunk's broadcast confirmed that the world was once a single landmass. What exists now, the four blues, the separated oceans, the red line, the Grand Line, is the result of something that happened at the end of the Void Century, something whose scale exceeded any natural disaster. The breaking of the world was a consequence of the Void Century's events. Every ocean that currently exists, every island that now sits separate from every other, is downstream from whatever happened during those 100 years. The all blue being real is downstream from it. The red line's existence is downstream from it. The current geography of the world is the aftermath of a catastrophe that the people who won built their authority on top of and called the natural order of things. The giant straw hat in Mary Joyce, stored in a special climate-controlled chamber deep within the celestial dragon's home, is larger than a building. Someone wore it. The hat is the same shape as the hat on Luffy's head. The relationship between the two hats, between the ancient hat stored at the world's center of power and the child's hat given to Luffy on a dock in the East Blue, has not been fully explained. But the connection between them is established by the specific detail with which Oda drew both, and established connections in One Piece exist for reasons. Joy Boy is the name Roger spoke when he wept at Laugh Tale. Joy Boy is the name on the poneglyph apology at the bottom of the sea near Fishman Island, the unfulfilled promise. The thing that was supposed to have happened and did not, whose not happening, is what Roger meant when he said they were too early. Joy Boy is the title Kaido gave Luffy in the moment Gear 5th activated, recognizing in the laugh and the light and the specific quality of what he was watching something he had been told about but had not expected to see. Joy Boy is not only a historical figure. Joy Boy is a role. The role was vacant. It appears to no longer be. Now let us talk about the people who sail. Let us talk about the crews. The Roger pirates made the complete circuit of the Grand Line. No crew before them had done it. No crew after them, in the decades between Roger's execution and the story's present, has completed it either. The Straw Hats are in the process of becoming the second crew to do so. The Roger pirates are in the specific category of having sailed the entire Grand Line, still unique. Roger led them. Rayleigh was his first mate, the person beside him for the entire journey, whose specific knowledge of what they found at Laugh Tale makes him the single most informed source the story contains on what the destination actually holds. Scopa-Gaban occupied a position alongside Rayleigh in the crew's hierarchy, confirmed by the specific respect other crew members showed toward him. Shanks and Buggy joined as apprentices, children on a ship of adults who were extraordinary, even by the standards the Grand Line produces. Oden Kozuki joined after the crew reached Wano, opening a chapter of the story that connects the Roger pirates' journey to Wano's history in a way that makes everything Wano represents feel less like coincidence and more like continuation. Crocus joined specifically to manage Roger's illness, to keep the body alive long enough for the journey to complete. Toki joined after Oden and would eventually spend her power to send the scabbards forward through time. The future sight aimed in one direction and the cost paid in the same instant. The Whitebeard pirates were organized across 16 divisions, each commanded by a division commander considered among the world's strongest fighters. Marco's first division was led by the one fighter whose fruit grants recovery from any wound. The blue phoenix flames regenerating tissue rather than burning it, making him the most durable, sustained fighter the crew contained. The second division was Ace's, the command that made his capture a statement about Whitebeard worth making. The meeting between the Roger pirates and the Whitebeard pirates, when Roger's crew sought Oden, lasted 3 days of fighting between two genuinely matched forces, ending in the specific recognition that comes from finding someone capable of pushing back completely. The sake afterward was not concession. It was the acknowledgement of genuine equivalence. The Straw Hat pirates have no formal structure. The crew numbers 10 after Jinabe formally joins in Wano, each invitation having been extended and declined across multiple previous arcs for reasons that were always about timing rather than desire. Their combined bounties after Wano exceed 8 billion berries. The sum surpasses Roger's individual bounty, which means the collective of what the Straw Hats represent in the world's power calculus already exceeds what the Pirate King represented as an individual. They are, as a crew, already larger than the benchmark the story set for the destination. The question the journey is building toward is what that means when Luffy reaches the place the benchmark was set at. Now let us talk about the people themselves. Luffy was born on May 5th. His blood type is F, confirmed through SBS, the rarest type in One Piece's world. He holds the rarest fruit of the rarest fruit category. He carries the rarest blood type. The matching of these rarities in a single person is not something the story makes explicit, but that accumulates as a fact when the details are held together. His height is 174 centimeters after the time scale. His dream, distinct from being Pirate King, was whispered to Ace and Sabo in childhood and has been referenced by people who heard it, with expressions communicating scale, always without the content being provided directly. The dream is the reason for the destination. Knowing the destination without knowing the reason leaves a specific gap. Zoro was born on November 11th. Wado Ichimonji was Queena's sword before it was his, given by her father as acknowledgement that Zoro was the person she competed with most seriously, the person who could carry what she had worked toward. It is the white sword. He keeps it in his mouth, the promise held literally in the teeth, ground against it in every fight. Sandai Kitetsu is cursed and confirmed so, selected by Zoro at a market in Logetown through the specific test of extending his wrist beneath the spinning blade and trusting that luck would outweigh the curse. It did. The sword has served him throughout the story, without the curse manifesting in any form he could not manage. Enma is one of the 21 great grade swords, capable of externalizing Haki involuntarily, draining it at a rate that weakens an untrained user with every swing. For Zoro, who has more Haki than the sword can drain, it became a training instrument that advanced his development faster than any deliberate practice could have. Zoro gets lost. He gets lost in environments so simple that other characters find the getting lost inexplicable. The story has maintained this detail across the entire run without providing any in-universe explanation for it. It is as much a part of Zoro as the three sword style. Some things about a person are simply true. Nami was born on July 3rd in Kokoyashi village, which Arlong occupied for years, extracting tribute and using Nami's cartographic skills to produce maps that the story eventually confirms are world quality. The maps she drew under coercion, the skill extracted from her through years of servitude and grief, are the maps that train the ability the Straw Hats depend on for every navigation the story requires. The coercion did not own the skill. The skill was always hers. Her orange trees grew in the garden of the house Bellamere raised her in, and they have travelled with her since she joined the crew, living on the Thousand Sunnies deck through every subsequent arc. The grief made continuous, the loss made present. The specific mechanism by which a person carries what they loved forward into the life that came after the loving. Usopp was born on April 1st. The date is intentional. His lies have a specific property. They tend to come true. The 300,000-man army he claimed was coming to defend his village became real, in its way, when the Straw Hats arrived. The giant fish he described to impress Kaya was a real species. His claimed sniping accomplishments, which began as fabrications, became factual through the course of the story. Usopp announces the future he is going to create through the mechanism of claiming it before he can honestly claim it. His father Yasop is a red-hair pirate, established early enough in the story that the connection preceded its narrative relevance. Sanji was born on March 2nd and does not use his hands in combat. The rule is maintained with the discipline of a choice that was never made casually. The decision of a person who understood what his hands were for and who kept them out of the one context where they would be used as weapons. He cooks with them. He protects them during fights by fighting with his legs instead. The rule breaks once at Whole Cake Island when his brothers have done something his hands reach for before he has consciously decided to let them reach. The breaking of the rule is the most complete statement the story makes about what Zeph's sacrifice communicated to Sanji about the value of his hands. The rule was the communication, maintained for years. The breaking was the evidence of what the communication protected. Sanji's Diable Jambe ignites his leg with heat sufficient to burn what it contacts. He is not a devil fruit user. The fire is generated through a mechanism the story has attributed to friction and will, and something not yet fully articulated. What is established is that the fire is there, that it is powerful enough to match other fire users, and that it connects Sanji to the fire symbol the story distributes across its characters with the specific care of a man who understands that fire means something in this narrative. The fire on Sanji's leg is the love expressed as heat. Zeph's sacrifice continued in the combustion of his students' fighting style. Chopper was born on December 24th and ate the Hito no Mi as a reindeer, which gave him the capacity for human thought and speech, rather than the ability to transform into a human form, because the fruit gives a non-human the qualities of humanity rather than its shape. He was rejected by his reindeer herd for being a monster. He was rejected by humans who encountered him for the same reason. Hiluluk found him and accepted him, and died before teaching him everything, and the death converted Chopper's gratitude into the mission of becoming the doctor who can cure anything, of making Hiluluk's belief in medicine's power true by demonstrating it personally. His 7 transformations are achieved through the Rumble Ball, a drug he developed himself through his own research as a reindeer who became a doctor. He made a drug that alters how his devil fruit works. The fact is quietly extraordinary. Robin was born on February 6th in Ohara. She was reading poneglyphs at 8 years old, which means she began carrying the mission that would define her life, before she was old enough to fully understand what the mission was. Her Hana no Mi blooms replicas of her body's parts from any surface within range, and she feels through every replica. She can extend her perception to any surface her range reaches. The fruit is the perfect instrument for a person who spent her childhood learning, through direct experience, that knowing who was coming before they arrived was the difference between surviving and not surviving. Her dream is to reach Laugh-Tale and read what is written there. It is Olvia's dream. It is every Ohara scholar's dream. It is 800 years of purpose aimed at a woman who once said she had no reason to live, and who, standing under a burning flag with a crew she would not leave again, found one. Frankie was born on March 9th. His real name is Cutty Flam. He changed it while living under Tom's care, severing the connection between his name and the history that would have identified him. Tom was executed. Frankie survived the accident that should have killed him by beginning the modification process while lying on the seabed, replacing what was destroyed with what was available, trading biological for mechanical, because the mechanical would not break in the same ways. His body is approximately 30% original human tissue, by his own accounting. The Thousand Sunny was built by him and is the continuation of Tom's shipbuilding philosophy in its most complete form. A ship designed to love its crew and to be loved in return, built by someone who understood what Tom's work meant and what it required, and who spent his skills on producing the ship that Tom's legacy was building toward. Brook was born on April 3rd and died approximately 50 years before meeting Luffy. The Yomi Yomi no Mi returned his soul to his body, but the return required his soul to travel the ocean's surface for a year, searching for the body's location. And during that year, the body decomposed completely. He returned to a skeleton. The afro survived because of the density of the hair, which the story offers as a joke and which is also simply true. He can project his soul outside the skeleton, while the bones remain stationary, moving through walls in a form that physical barriers cannot stop, gathering information as an invisible presence in a room. He plays music. He played music alone on a ghost ship for 50 years, because the alternative was stopping, and stopping would have been the end of the promise. And the promise was the reason to continue, and the reason was sufficient. Now let us talk about the powers that exist outside the standard categories. The Rokushiki are 6 techniques developed by Cypher Pole assassins through training that pushes the human body past every ordinary limit. Soru accelerates the user to speeds high enough that movement appears as teleportation. Geppo uses rapid kicks against the air to create platforms, allowing movement in empty space by generating momentary resistance through speed. Tekai hardens the body to iron-equivalent density against incoming impact, effective as defense but limiting for simultaneous movement. Shigen fires a pointed finger with concentrated force sufficient to penetrate flesh as a bullet would. Rankiyaku sends cutting air pressure from a high-velocity kick at distances that no thrown weapon could match. Kamiya relaxes the body to extreme flexibility, allowing attacks to pass through rather than land. Rokuogen, the 7th technique, is the combination of all 6, accessible only to masters of the complete set, projecting concentrated force through whatever it strikes and destroying from within. Lunarians were a race that lived above the clouds, on the red line, before the current celestial dragons established themselves in Mary Joise. The government conducted what amounts to an extermination campaign against them. King, whose name before serving Kaido was Alba, is the only confirmed living Lunarian. Brown skin, white hair, black wings, a flame that burns on their back in the natural state. They can survive any environment, endure damage that would destroy any ordinary person, and the combination of Lunarian biology with Zoan fruit enhancement makes King among the most physically durable fighters the story produced. Their weakness, the relationship between the back flame and their combat profile, creates a moment of specific danger precisely when the flame goes out. Defense drops, speed increases, and the moment that appears, as vulnerability is also the moment of highest danger. The Seraphim are the government's attempt to weaponize what it could not destroy. Lunarian genetic material combined with base DNA of former warlords produces child-sized soldiers with Lunarian durability and warlord powers. The Seraphim modeled on Mihawk can cut. The Seraphim modeled on Hancock can petrify. The program's specific logic is the logic of all government responses to exceptional individuals in One Piece. That which cannot be owned must be replicated. That which cannot be controlled must have a controlled version created. That the appropriate response to power that refuses service is to manufacture a compliant version of the same power, and aim it at whatever requires aiming at. Now let us talk about the numbers, the scale. Roger's confirmed bounty was 5,564,800 berries. The precision of that number communicates that it was calculated rather than approximated, that the institution assigning it considered the calculation worth performing carefully. Luffy's post-Wano bounty is 3 billion berries, slightly more than half Roger's total, which the story uses as a measurement of distance remaining. The combined Straw Hat bounties after Wano exceed 8 billion, surpassing Roger's individual total and meaning that the crew's collective weight in the world's power calculus already exceeds what the Pirate King represented as an individual. Impel Down descends through 6 floors of specific suffering. Level 1, Crimson Hell, is razor-edged flora that cuts anything brushing against it. Level 2, Wild Beast Hell, holds dangerous predatory animals. Level 3, Starvation Hell, works through deprivation and disease rather than any external agent. Level 4, Blazing Heat Hell, maintains temperatures that make existing there a continuous ordeal. Level 5, Freezing Hell, inverts the 4th floor's temperature into cold that damages tissue simply by being in it. Level 6, Eternal Hell, reserves for the most dangerous prisoners complete and permanent isolation without any active torment beyond the confinement itself. The people held in Level 6 when Luffy arrived were Jinbei, Crocodile, Shiryu, and Daz Bones, among others. Blackbeard came specifically to recruit from this population, understanding that the most dangerous people the government had ever captured were, from another perspective, the most talented pool of fighters the world had concentrated in one location. The 3 ancient weapons. Pluton is a warship capable of destroying islands, built by Water 7's ancient shipwrights. The blueprints were held by Tom, passed to Frankie, and destroyed by Frankie at Eni's lobby, rather than allow government possession, which means only the actual ship's location, wherever it is, remains as the weapon itself. Poseidon is Shirahoshi, whose voice commands the Sea Kings, whose emotional state deploys them as a force that exceeds any conventional military. She carries the weapon's power in her nature, without having chosen to be what she is. Uranus is the 3rd weapon, unconfirmed in nature and location in the story's current state. 2 weapons identified, 1 remaining. Now let us talk about the era that made the current era. Roger was executed 24 years before Luffy set sail. Luffy is 17 at the departure point. Roger died the year he was born. The Great Pirate Era and Luffy are the same age. They began simultaneously. The era was the announcement of a purpose, and Luffy was the purpose announced. And they arrived in the world together. Roger chose his execution. He turned himself in voluntarily after disbanding his crew, having completed what he came to do. The government agreed to execute him publicly, believing the execution would function as a warning. Roger agreed to the public execution because he understood it would function as an invitation. His final words, "My treasure. If you want it, I will let you have it. Look for it. I left all of it at that place." The world heard the invitation and not the warning. The Great Pirate Era began. It has not ended. The Roger Pirates' final voyage lasted approximately 2 years. They gathered what they needed: Odin for the poneglyphs, Crocus for Roger's body, the full crew for the journey. They reached Laugh Tale. Odin read. Roger heard. The full truth of the Void Century became available to them. Roger wept. He said they were too early, that the world was not ready for what the knowledge required, that the person who could act on it had not yet been born. He called it being too early, and what he was describing was the specific grief of finding what you looked for and being unable to use what you found, of placing it back in the world and trusting that the world would eventually send someone to receive it. Roger and Garp formed an alliance at God Valley 23 years before the story begins. God Valley no longer exists. The island was erased from geography. What happened there included the Rox Pirates operation, Garp and Roger's collaboration against Rox D. Zebek and his crew, and the presence of infant Shanks in circumstances whose full explanation the story is still providing. Rox D. Zebek assembled on his crew people, who would become 3 of the 4 future Yonko: Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido. The force that required both a marine hero and the Pirate King to defeat is the story's clearest precedent for the specific quality of threat that necessitates enemies cooperating. And the precedent is relevant to every subsequent arc, where former enemies found themselves needing to work together. Now let us talk about what the story has not yet given. Let us end where the story's remaining facts wait. The true name of the ancient kingdom has not been confirmed. The content of Laugh-Tale's treasure has not been stated directly. Luffy's true dream has not been fully articulated. Uranus has not been identified. Dragon's power has not been demonstrated. The specific content of what Im is and how Im has persisted from the world government's founding to the story's present is being revealed but is not complete. The full meaning of the giant straw hat and who last wore it is not yet provided. The specific circumstances of Shanks's birth and what the Figureland name means to the story's remaining revelations is being delivered across current chapters and is not finished. 500 facts about a world whose most important facts are still being written, somewhere, with the lamp on and the page almost finished, by a man who has known the ending since before the beginning was drawn, and who is carrying it forward, chapter by chapter, connection by connection, toward the moment when the waiting ends and the receiving begins. One Piece contains more world than any single reading can hold. Tonight, we moved through 500 pieces of it. The geography that is the aftermath of a world broken at the void century's end. The fruits that carry the will of their previous bearers forward into whoever finds them next. The Haki that exists in every living thing and that most people never consciously touch. The institutions that the winners of the void century built and that the story's characters are in the process of answering. The 4 people who held the world's equilibrium before Luffy arrived and began changing what equilibrium meant. The truth preserved in stone because the people who carved it understood that stone survives what people do not. The crews and the swords and the promises and the hats and the fires and the music played alone for 50 years because the music was the promise and the promise was the reason and the reason was enough. 500 facts, not a complete account, a window, and the view from the window goes further than tonight reaches. Good night. Wherever you are, I hope the room is comfortable and the weight of what we moved through settles into the kind of sleep that continues it, the kind where the world is still there, just past the edge of waking, immense and detailed and still being built. If you would like to stay a little longer, there is another video to your left, waiting whenever you are ready. But there is no hurry. There is never any hurry here. Sleep well. There is something worth pausing on before we continue. Something about the way the Haki system relates to the crew's development across the story's arcs. When Luffy first enters the Grand Line, None of the Straw Hats use Haki consciously. When they reach Sabaody Archipelago and are defeated by Kizaru and scattered by Bartholomew Kuma, none of them have what Haki provides. The defeat at Sabaody is the story's precise measurement of the gap between the crew as they were and the crew they needed to become. The 2-year time skip is the mechanism by which the gap is closed, each crew member training alone in a location that required them to develop what they lacked. Zoro trained under Mihawk himself. Nami studied weather at Witheria, the weather study island in the sky. Usopp trained his physique on the Boyne archipelago. Sanji was trapped on the Kamabaka kingdom and eventually trained there. Robin studied with the Revolutionary Army. Frankie studied Vegapunk's research in Baltimore. Brook toured as a musician and continued his training in the ways available to a skeleton. Chopper trained medicine in Birdie Kingdom. The 2 years were not rest. They were the specific, necessary preparation that the defeat at Sabaody made unavoidable. And when the crew reassembles at Sabaody after those 2 years, they are not the same people who were scattered from it. They are the people who the scattered people became through the specific pressure of 2 years of training alone, each one carrying what they found in the absence of the crew forward into the crew's continuation. Haki training is not simply physical. The development of observation. Haki requires sustained attention to states of consciousness that ordinary daily life does not train. The awareness of presence at the edge of perception, the reading of intent before it becomes action, the extension of sense past its ordinary boundary. Armament. Haki development requires sustained exposure to impacts sufficient to force the will to harden in response, which is why many of the story's best armament Haki users have histories of being hit by things that should have broken them. The hardening develops under pressure. It requires pressure to develop. And Conqueror's Haki, which cannot be developed where it does not exist, can be refined through the specific practice of controlling what was always there, of learning to release it selectively rather than comprehensively, of making the overflow precise enough to be useful rather than merely enormous. The history of every Haki user in the story is the history of a person who was exposed to enough pressure that the capacity they were born with or developed was forced to become conscious. The pressure is the teacher. The capacity was always there. Let us talk about the specific geography of the New World. The New World is the second half of the Grand Line, the portion that begins after reaching the Red Line and passing through to the other side, the sea that only the most exceptional crews ever enter, and that none but the Roger pirates have fully traversed. The islands of the New World are not simply more dangerous than the first half of the Grand Line. They are qualitatively different. Their magnetic fields are, as established, strong enough to require 3 log poses simultaneously. Their weather is more extreme. Their sea life more aggressive. Their political structures more consolidated around figures of exceptional power, the Yonko and their territories, than anything the first half of the Grand Line contained. The New World is the sea that the first half of the Grand Line prepared the crew to enter. It is the preparations test, conducted at the scale the preparation was building toward. Wano is a country that closed itself to the outside world approximately 800 years before the story's present. The closure corresponding to the period of the Void Century, the same period during which the world government was establishing itself across the rest of the world. The timing of Wano's closure is not coincidental. The Kazuki family, which ruled Wano at the time of the closure and which created the poneglyphs, understood what was happening in the wider world and made a choice. to close the borders and protect the country from the outside events. The specific thing they were protecting is connected to whatever the Kazuki family knew about the Void Century, connected to the fact that the Kazuki family created the poneglyphs, connected to Odin's role as the one person in the world capable of reading them. The closure of Wano and the existence of the poneglyphs are not separate facts. They are aspects of the same decision, made 800 years ago by people who understood the specific nature of what was coming. The Kazuki family's retainers, the 9 red scabbards, trained under Odin and were sent forward in time by Toki's power when Odin was killed and Orochi and Kaido occupied the country. The 20 years they skipped, landing in Wano's present rather than its past, with a specific number of years the scabbards needed to survive long enough for the circumstances of Odin's death to be answered. The skip was not random. Toki's power was aimed at a moment, and the moment she aimed at was the moment when the answer to what happened to Odin became possible. The ship she sent forward arrived when Luffy was approaching, when the alliance was forming, when the specific conditions that made liberation possible were assembling themselves. The sending was the love aimed at the future. The arriving was the love received. Let us talk about the specific mechanics of the story's devil fruit naming system. Every devil fruit has a name in the standard Japanese naming convention, and the names follow a consistent pattern. The repeated syllable of the power, followed by no mie, which means fruit. The Gomu Gomu no Mi is the rubber rubber fruit. The Mera Mera no Mi is the blaze blaze fruit. The Gura Gura no Mi is the quake quake fruit. The Yami Yami no Mi is the dark dark fruit. The Hito Hito no Mi is the human human fruit. The pattern is consistent enough to be predictable, which means a reader who knows the naming convention can understand the basic nature of a fruit from its name before the fruit is used. The government renamed the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika as the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the rubber rubber fruit, specifically to obscure what the fruit was. The renaming is confirmed. The name the government chose was not a description of what the fruit did in its standard form, but a description of the physical quality of the fruit's standard manifestation, which is rubber, and the renaming succeeded in hiding the fruit's true nature from everyone for the entirety of the story, up to chapter 1044. The Warlord system's 7 members across the story's run included several who were recruited specifically because their power levels or territorial influence made them valuable. Dracule Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, held the position effectively as an individual rather than a territorial force, his value being the deterrent his reputation provided. Boa Hancock of the Kuja Pirates held the position through the Kuja tribe's combat capability, and her personal power combined with Amazon Lily's strategic position near the Calm Belt. Bartholomew Kuma, whose true nature as a Revolutionary Army agent was concealed for years, held the position while secretly serving Dragon. Gecko Moria built his zombie army at Thriller Bark. Jinbei, before resigning his position in protest of Marineford, held the position representing the Sun Pirates and their fisherman community. Crocodile held the position while secretly building Baroque works toward his Alabaster operation. Don Quixote do Flamingo held the position while running the Smile production supply chain and managing multiple criminal enterprises through the Don Quixote Pirates. The 7 warlords across the story's run were 7 people using the government's recognition as cover for operations. The government would have opposed if it had known the full picture. The government's system for co-opting powerful pirates created systematically exactly the condition it was designed to prevent. Let us talk about the Void Century, in the specific terms of what is confirmed rather than what is speculated. The following facts are established. The void century lasted 100 years, from approximately 800 years before the story's present to 700 years before it. The world government was founded at the void century's conclusion. 20 kings formed the alliance that won the war, fought during the void century. The ancient kingdom existed during the void century and was destroyed in or by the war's conclusion. The ancient kingdom created the poneglyphs specifically to carry the truth of the void century forward, past the suppression that followed. The world government suppresses all knowledge of the void century through the specific mechanism of making poneglyph knowledge a capital offense. The Buster call against O'Hara was conducted because O'Hara's scholars were researching the void century through the poneglyphs. The geographic shape of the current world is, per Vegapunk's broadcast, different from the world's original shape, and the difference was caused by events that occurred during or around the void century's conclusion. Roger reached Laugh-Tale and received the full truth of the void century through Odin reading the poneglyphs gathered there. Roger wept upon learning the truth. Those are the confirmed facts. Everything else is the framework the story is building toward confirming. The Roger pirates gathered 4 road poneglyphs across their final voyage. The 4 road poneglyphs, when their information is combined, point to the location of Laugh-Tale. This is the mechanism by which the destination is found. Not a single map, but 4 partial maps, each one requiring the others to be useful, distributed across the world in locations that require reaching Fishman Island, Zoo, Whole Cake Island, or Dressrosa, and Wano. The distribution is a navigation requirement built into the destination's accessibility. Reaching Laugh-Tale requires having navigated the Grand Line extensively enough to have gathered all 4 road poneglyphs, which means the destination can only be reached by a crew that has already demonstrated the capability to have reached it. The journey is the qualification. The gathering of the 4 road poneglyphs is the proof of the journey's completion to a point where the destination becomes accessible. Let us talk about the specific history of the story's most important locations before the story began. Fishman Island is the oldest continuously inhabited location that the story's current characters interact with. Having been inhabited by fishmen and merfolk for millennia before the surface-dwelling humans of the current era made contact with it. It sits below the red line, on the seafloor at an extreme depth, accessible through a channel in the ocean floor that ships must navigate without being able to sail in any conventional sense. The island is enclosed in a bubble of breathable air, maintained by coral and the specific chemistry of its location. Its history includes enslavement of its people by the celestial dragon system, the founding of the Sun Pirates by Fisher Tiger as a response to that enslavement, and the political history of Queen Otohim's effort to advocate for fishermen's right to surface integration, which was ended by her assassination. The assassination, conducted by someone aligned with interests opposed to integration, was framed to blame the humans Otohim had been working with, poisoning the political environment in ways that Hody Jones exploited in the Fishman Island arc. The full political complexity of the island's recent history, the assassination and its framing, and the generation it poisoned, and the arc that resulted, is one of the story's most complete political arguments dressed as a storyline. Water 7 and Inea's Lobby are geographically close to each other in the story's world, connected by the train line that the sea train runs, and their proximity is not incidental. The city of master shipwrights and the world government's judicial stronghold existing in close proximity is the specific geographic expression of the relationship between the two. The government used the skills of Water 7's craftsmen, including Tom, who built the sea train and who built the Oro Jackson for Roger. The relationship between Tom and the government that eventually tried and executed him, between the master shipwright service and the government's specific quality of gratitude, is the relationship between the story's craftsmen and the institutions they serve. Tom built the government's infrastructure and was destroyed by the government's institutional logic when that logic required a target. The proximity of the city of builders and the island of the government's courts is the geography of that relationship, made navigable by a train that Tom built. Let us talk about the specific nature of the relationship between Luffy and his crew that distinguishes it from every other crew configuration the story presents. The Straw Hats did not join because they were recruited in any conventional sense. Each one joined because they encountered Luffy at a specific moment in their own story and found in that encounter the specific thing their own story required. Zoro was facing death tied to a post, and Luffy cut him down and asked him to join as if the cutting was not a negotiation, but an obvious fact. Nami needed a pirate and used Luffy, then could not leave because the pirate turned out to be the person who destroyed the system that had imprisoned her. Usopp wanted to be a brave warrior of the sea, and Luffy saw him as one before Usopp knew he was one. Sanji was offered the sea by a person who ate everything in the restaurant without complaint and asked for his life to be fed. Chopper was told he was wanted as a friend rather than as a doctor, which no one had ever said to him before. Robin said she wanted to live, and the crew told her they already knew that, and burned the flag of the world that had tried to stop her from living. Frankie was rebuilt by a crew that destroyed his criminal empire and then asked him to build their ship. Brook had a song to play for a whale, and Luffy asked him to play it for all of them. Jinbei was asked across multiple arcs, across multiple years of publication time, and each time he declined for the specific reason that he had something to finish first, and when he finished it, he joined. Each one arrived at the crew through the story of their own need, meeting the specific quality of what Luffy offered. And what Luffy offered was the same each time. He saw them as what they were capable of being, rather than what they currently were. And the seeing was the invitation, and the invitation was sufficient. Let us talk about the specific nature of Blackbeard's power combination, which the story has presented as unprecedented, and which the story has not yet fully explained. Blackbeard holds 2 devil fruits. He holds the Yami Yami no Mi, which he had for the duration of his career before the story's beginning, which he sought deliberately, which he killed a crewmate to obtain. And he holds the Gura Gura no Mi, extracted from Whitebeard's body at Marineford, through a process the story showed happening, but is not explained mechanically. The standard fact of 1 fruit per user being the limit, with a second fruit killing the user, was apparently not applicable to Blackbeard, or was circumvented by Blackbeard through some mechanism specific to his body or to the Yami Yami no Mi's properties. The story has confirmed that Blackbeard's body is not ordinary in some way that has not been fully articulated. The specific nature of what makes him capable of holding 2 fruits is part of the answer the story's remaining chapters are building toward. What is established is the result. He holds both, and the combination of the world's most destructive fruit and the fruit that nullifies other devil fruit abilities gives him a power configuration that no other character in the story possesses. Let us talk about the specific nature of the story's treasure system and what bounties actually communicate. A bounty in One Piece is not simply a price on a head. It is the government's official assessment of how dangerous a person is to the existing world order, which means it is also a measurement of how much a person threatens the specific institutions and power structures that the world government maintains. A person with a high bounty is not necessarily a violent criminal in any conventional moral sense. They are a threat to the current order, which may mean they are a pirate, or may mean they are someone who has dismantled the government's operations, or may mean they are simply someone the government has classified as dangerous because of what they know or what they represent. Robin's bounty was assigned when she was 8 years old, immediately after Ohara was destroyed, because the government classified the last survivor of Ohara's scholars as a threat not for anything she had done, but for what she was capable of knowing and doing in the future. The bounty is the government's fear expressed as a number, and the people with the highest bounties are the people the government is most afraid of, which is to say they are the people whose existence most threatens the specific conditions that the world government requires to maintain itself. Let us talk about the specific nature of the story's weather as a narrative element. Grand Line weather is not simply extreme. It is magnetic, tied to the island's specific geological properties, capable of producing phenomena that do not occur in the Four Blues under any circumstances. Snow falling in the summer, burning winds, constant lightning strikes over specific locations, visible rivers of cloud that follow predictable paths between islands. These weather phenomena are not simply setting. They are the geographic expression of the Grand Line's specific instability, the visual representation of what it means to sail in a sea whose physics are not governed by the same rules as the rest of the world. Nami's skill is specifically adapted to Grand Line weather, which is why her navigation is irreplaceable and why the crew could not simply find another navigator to replace her function. Grand Line weather requires someone whose understanding of weather patterns was developed in the Grand Line specifically, whose intuition for what a sky color means was built from years of observing skies that no ordinary meteorological education accounts for. Let us talk about the specific nature of the relationship between the story's devil fruits and the animals from which Zoan fruits draw their power. Every animal that a Zoan fruit models is, in the fruit's transformation, the fruit's interpretation of that animal, rather than a biologically accurate representation. The specific capabilities a Zoan grants are calibrated to the mythological or popular understanding of the animal, rather than to what a biologist would say about the animal's actual capabilities. A person who eats a tiger, Zoan does not gain the specific capabilities of a real tiger. They gain the capabilities of what a tiger represents in the context of the fruit system, which is strength and speed and predatory precision at a level that exceeds any actual tiger. This distinction is most visible in the mythical Zoan category, where the animals modeled do not exist, and therefore the fruit draws entirely from mythology, from what people believed the creature was capable of, rather than from anything that could be biologically confirmed. The Hito Hito no Mi model Nika draws from the mythology of a sun god whose specific nature was joy and liberation, and the specific quality of impossible freedom that made reality optional. The fruit's awakening, Gear 5th, is the most complete demonstration of what a mythical Zoan awakening produces, when the mythology it draws from is a deity of freedom, a form of power so complete that it makes the user's own will the physics of the space they occupy. Let us talk about the specific nature of the story's geography below the water's surface. Fishman Island aside, The ocean floor of the Grand Line is not fully mapped by any current power. The ancient kingdom's civilization, whatever form it took, appears to have included undersea components. And the Void Centuries events affected the sea floor as well as the surface. The Sea Kings inhabit the depths, and their behavior in the story is consistent with beings whose instincts are organized around a history that is not fully visible in the current narrative. A history that Joy Boy appears to be connected to, and that Shirahoshi's awakening as Poseidon is the current story's most direct connection to. The communication between Shirahoshi and the Sea Kings, and between Luffy and the Sea Kings at Fishman Island, both suggest that the Sea Kings are not simply large predatory animals, but beings with a relationship to the world's older history, waiting for something that the current era has been building toward. They gathered when Luffy arrived at Fishman Island. They gathered when Joy Boy was relevant before. The gathering is not coincidence. It is recognition. Let us talk about the specific history of Shanks before the story begins. Shanks was found as an infant at God Valley during the battle between the Roger Pirates, the Marines under Garp, and the Rocks Pirates. The specific circumstances of his presence there, who he was with, and why an infant would be present at that specific location during that specific event are part of the answer the story has been building across multiple arcs, and which recent chapters have begun delivering through the Figureland family name and through Shanks's appearance before the Gorosei. What can be confirmed? Shanks was at God Valley. Roger's crew found him there. Roger's crew raised him as an apprentice. He and Buggy served on the Oro Jackson together as a children. He received the straw hat from Roger before Roger disbanded the crew. He gave the straw hat to Luffy. The chain of transmission from God Valley to Roger to Shanks to Luffy is confirmed. The meaning of the first link in the chain, why an infant was at God Valley, and what it means for who Shanks is part of what is still coming. Let us talk about the specific nature of the relationship between the celestial dragons and the regular nations beneath them. The celestial dragons do not govern, they occupy. The actual administration of Mary Jowasin and of the world government is conducted by officials, by the Gorosei, by the Marines, by Cypher Paul, by the administrative apparatus that manages the coalition of 170 nations. The celestial dragons themselves interact with the world primarily through their ability to summon admiral-level marine response to any insult or inconvenience they experience, through their ability to acquire anything or anyone they want, through the specific legal privilege their status provides, and through the tribute system that brings wealth from the world's nations to Mary Joais, in what the story presents as a one-way flow of resources from the governed to the governing class. They are, in the story's political architecture, the specific form of aristocracy that exists not to produce anything, or protect anything, or govern anything, but simply to be, and to have the being recognized and compensated by everyone below them. Their existence is the story's most pointed argument about inherited privilege as a system. The descendants of the people who won the war 800 years ago are still collecting the prize, and the prize is everything everyone else produces. The story's treatment of inherited privilege is not limited to the celestial dragons. The Vinsmoke family of the North Blue are the remnants of a kingdom that once ruled a continent through the specific combination of military superiority and the genetic modification of their soldiers. They lost the continent. They retained the title and the technology and the specific quality of believing that their historical position entitled them to treatment that their current position could not justify. The Vinsmoke children, modified in the womb to enhance their combat capabilities and, in the modification, have specific emotional capacities removed, are the story's most complete portrait of what inherited aristocracy does to the people it produces when the aristocracy has decided that feeling is a weakness. It creates children who are powerful and who cannot use that power for anything that requires caring about the person the power is aimed at. Sanji is the exception precisely because the modification did not take on him, because he retained the capacity for feeling that his siblings had removed, and because his father discarded him for it, and because being discarded by a system that valued power over compassion turned out to be the condition for becoming the person the story needed him to be. Let us talk about the specific nature of the relationship between the story's food and its emotional content. Sanji's cooking is not a combat ability or a power system element. It is the story's most consistent demonstration of care expressed as craft. The meals he produces, from the first meal he cooked for Luffy in the Baratie to every subsequent meal across the voyage, are the physical expression of an attention to the people being fed that is not about the ingredients or the technique, but about the understanding of what the person eating needs. Sanji has never cooked a meal carelessly. He has never refused to feed someone who was hungry. He maintained this commitment through the Baratie's hardest years, through Thriller Bark when the crew was exhausted, through every arc where cooking required producing exceptional food from whatever the available materials happened to be. The principle is the same each time, carried from Zeph's example, that love expressed through feeding someone is not a small thing. It is the most fundamental expression of care that a person can perform, the act of recognizing someone's need and answering it without being asked. Every meal Sanji has cooked is that recognition. Every meal is the principle. Let us talk about the specific nature of the relationship between Brook's music and the story's emotional register. Brook plays music at every significant emotional moment in the story, and the playing is not incidental. Music is his contribution to the crew's internal life, the specific form of care that a skeleton with a violin can offer, the expression of feeling through a medium that does not require a face capable of expressing it. He plays at celebrations and at grieving, and at the specific moments between celebration and grieving when the crew needs something that is neither. The specific song he plays at Marineford, on the battlefield, in the middle of the war, is not chosen randomly. Music in One Piece is the medium through which things that cannot be said are said, through which the distance between people is bridged without the bridge being built from words, through which the dead are present in the specific sense that what they sang is still being sung. The Rumbar Pirates' final recording, the song they sang while dying, played for Laboon after Brook met Luffy, and before the crew fully understood what they were hearing, is the story's most complete demonstration of what music does in this narrative. It crosses the distance between the dead and the living, and carries the dead forward into the moment of the living's hearing, making the dead present in the only way they can be present after they are gone. The story ends where it began, not at the same location, not with the same characters, not in the same circumstances, but with the same question. What does it mean to be free? The East Blue asked it of Luffy through Shanks's arm. The Grand Line's first half asked it of every character the crew encountered and freed or failed to free, or helped to find their own freedom through the specific combination of the crew's presence and the character's own will. Marineford asked it at its most devastating. What does freedom cost, and who pays the cost? And what does it mean to be free when the people you love are not. The new world is asking it at its most complex, through the political history of the Void Century and the institutional history of the world government, and the specific question of what the world would look like if Joy Boy's promise were finally kept. And the answer, when it comes, will not be delivered through argument or declaration. It will be delivered through Luffy, through the specific quality of who he is, demonstrated across the full distance of the story. 200 connections and 500 facts and 30 years of chapters, building toward the single moment when the answer arrives not as a statement but as a recognition. The same recognition the story has been producing all along, from the first panel to the last. This is what freedom looks like. This is what it has always looked like. We just needed the whole story to see it clearly. Good night. Wherever you are, I hope the room is comfortable, and the weight of what we moved through settles into the kind of sleep that continues it. There is another video to your left, waiting whenever you are ready. There is no hurry. Sleep well. Let us talk about the specific nature of the relationship between the story's geography and its political meaning. The red line is not simply a landmass. It is the specific landmass on top of which the people who won the Void Century built their home, which means the world's most significant geographic feature is also the world's most significant political monument. The people who sit on top of the red line sit on top of the world, not metaphorically, but literally. And the literalness is the point. The geography argues for the hierarchy. The hierarchy uses the geography as its physical expression, and the two reinforce each other in a loop that has been running for 800 years. The Grand Line crosses the red line at 2 points. At each crossing point, the government has established a major installation. Mary Joie's at the crossing in the New World half, and the Marine Jord area and the gate to the Grand Line at the other crossing. The government controls every point of passage between the two halves of the Grand Line. The control of the passage is the control of the sea. The control of the sea is the control of the world. Let us talk about the specific nature of what Pluton means in the context of the current story. The ancient weapon, named Pluton, is a warship. Its blueprints were held by Tom, the master shipwright who built Roger's ship and who built the sea train that connects Water 7 to Eni's lobby. Tom was a fishman. He was tried under the world government system and executed through the specific mechanism of his own creation, the sea train, repurposed to carry him to his execution after he confessed to having aided Goldie Roger. The blueprints for Pluton were passed from Tom to Frankie before the execution, and Frankie destroyed them at Eni's lobby rather than allow them to fall into government or other hands. The destruction of the blueprints means that only the actual ship's existence and location can produce the weapon, which means the weapon question becomes, where is the ship? The story has connected the question to Wano specifically, through Kozaburo's reference to the country's ancient shipbuilding tradition, and the specific suggestion that the ship may have been built there. The answer to Pluton's location appears to be connected to the same location that produced Wado Ichimonji and Enma, and the specific shipbuilding tradition that made the Thousand Sunny possible. The connections between Water 7 and Wano and the ancient weapons system are threads the story laid down years before they became relevant. Let us talk about what the Sun Pirates became after Fisher Tiger's death. The crew, which Tiger had founded on the principle of liberation, that extended to every race and not only to fishmen, continued under Jinbei after Tiger was killed. Jinbei maintained the crew in the years between Tiger's death and Jinbei's eventually becoming a warlord, a decision made specifically to protect Fishman Island from the government's attention during a period when the island was vulnerable. The warlord's status that Jinbei accepted was an institutional compromise, a trade between the freedom that Tiger had built the crew around and the protection that the government could offer to the island through recognizing Jinbei's authority. The trade's cost was the public legitimation of the government system that had created the conditions Tiger had founded the crew to oppose. Jinbei eventually resigned the position in protest of Marineford, choosing the principled rejection of the system over the protection that the system provided. The trajectory from Tiger founding the crew through Jinbei's compromise, through Jinbei's resignation, through Jinbei eventually joining the Straw Hats is the full arc of a person who tried every available mechanism for protecting his people and found, eventually, that the only mechanism that worked was the specific kind of freedom that Luffy represented. The freedom that did not require compromising with the system that was doing the harm. Let us talk about what Law's Ope Ope no Mi actually does at its full extension. The Operation Fruit creates what Law calls a room, a spherical space within which Law has the ability to rearrange, cut, and transplant anything without causing damage in the way that ordinary cutting causes it. He can cut objects into pieces and rearrange them. He can switch the positions of living people and objects. He can transplant organs. At its full awakening, the fruit extends these capabilities across a dramatically larger area. The fruit's most significant capability, the one that defines its classification as the ultimate devil fruit by those who know about it, is the ability to grant eternal youth to another person through an operation that costs the operator their life. The world government wanted the Ope no Mi for this purpose, not for its combat capabilities, but for its capacity to make one person immortal. And the person they wanted to make immortal is the person at the top of the world government's actual power structure. The fruit that Law carries is the fruit that him wanted. The arc that produced Law as a character, the arc in which Corazon died to give Law the fruit, is also the arc in which the fruit was prevented from being used for the purpose the government most wanted it for. Corazon's death protected not just Law, but the fruit, keeping the government's route to immortality closed. Let us talk about what Dragon actually is beyond what the story has so far shown. Monkey D. Dragon is Luffy's father and the world's most wanted criminal. The leader of the Revolutionary Army, a force that opposes the world government through the specific mechanism of liberating nations from world government authority, rather than through direct confrontation with the government's military. The Revolutionary Army operates across multiple countries, building networks, developing alliances, training fighters, working toward the specific goal of dismantling the conditions that make the world government's authority possible. Dragon's personal power has not been demonstrated in the story's current state. He has been associated with wind, with storms, with weather phenomena that appear when he is emotionally invested in what is happening near him. The specific nature of whether these associations represent a devil fruit or Haki, or some combination, has not been confirmed. What is confirmed, he is the world's most wanted criminal, which means the government's fear of him, expressed in that bounty, places him at the highest level of threat the system recognizes. And what he is building, the specific form that the Revolutionary Army's effort has been taking, and will take when it reaches its critical moment, is part of the story's remaining content. Let us talk about what the Egghead arc specifically contributes to the story's accumulated facts. Vegapunk, the world's foremost scientist, whose 6 satellites extend his intelligence across 6 distinct areas of research, whose work produced the seraphim and the artificial devil fruits and the study of the lineage factor that the story's current power revelations are built on was killed during the Egghead arc. His broadcast reached the world's population before his death, delivering the confirmation that the world was once a single landmass, delivered the beginning of an explanation for what happened at the end of the Void Century, and was cut short before the full content could be delivered. The partial broadcast is the O'Hara Scholar's notes, reaching Robin in a different form, the truth traveling as far as it can before the suppression cuts it off, which is further than the last time, which means the next attempt will go further still. Vegapunk's research into the lineage factor, the genetic material that his Seraphim program draws from and that Kaido's Smile project was based on, represents the story's most current understanding of what devil fruits actually are at a biological level, and the understanding points toward an answer about the fruit's nature that the story has been building toward across multiple arcs, and that Egghead has moved significantly closer to articulating. The 500 facts we have moved through tonight are not the same 500 in the same proportion that any other selection of 500 would have been. Facts are not created equal in a story. Some carry more weight than others. Some are the foundations that other facts rest on, and some are the details that decorate the foundations, and some are the things that look like details until the foundation they belong to is finally visible. The confirmed geography of the world, once one landmass and now 4 blues and a grand line and a red line, is a foundation fact, because every other geographic fact rests on the geography. The Void Century is a foundation fact, because the political structure of the entire current world rests on what happened during it. The Haki system is a foundation fact, because the story's power physics rest on it. The relationship between the 3 ancient weapons and the 3 road poneglyphs and Joy Boy and the world government and Laugh Tale is a foundation. And the facts we trace tonight are the points on the foundation's surface, the places where the foundation touches the visible story. There are other points. There are points not yet visible because the foundation under them has not been shown from an angle that makes the points recognizable. They are coming. The foundation is still being revealed. And the revealing, chapter by chapter, is the reading. 500 facts. The world was once whole. It was broken. The truth of the breaking was preserved in stone, distributed across the ocean, waiting for a reader. The reader was born from the burning of the Island of Scholars. The power that holds the reader's life was grown in a fruit that has been looking for the right bearer for 800 years. The bearer is a boy who does not know he is a bearer, sailing toward a truth he does not know he is the destination of, carrying everything the people who loved him left behind, laughing the same laugh as the man whose hat he wears, moving through a world that is the aftermath of a catastrophe toward the moment when the catastrophe is answered. 500 facts. Not the full count, the window. The view from the window goes further than tonight, further than the Grand Line, further than the Red Line at the top of the world, all the way to the island at the end of the sea, where Roger wept and Joy Boy apologized, and something was left waiting for the person who would finally receive it. Good night. The room is quiet. The night is long enough. Sleep well. Let us take one more pass through the things the story establishes about its own rules that most readers absorb, without stopping to name as rules. The first is the rule of will. In One Piece, the stronger the will, the more impact the person has on the world around them. This is not a metaphor. It is physics. Conqueror's Haki knocks people unconscious through the overflow of will. Advanced Conqueror's Haki coats attacks in will, and makes them more destructive. The voice of all things is the capacity of will to extend past the boundaries of ordinary communication into the frequencies the world itself uses. Luffy's effect on people he encounters, the specific gravitational quality that pulls people toward him and changes their trajectories, is the product of a will so large that proximity to it constitutes an experience. The rule of will explains why the story's protagonists tend to win against opponents with greater technical skill or greater raw power. The will is the variable that technical skill and raw power cannot fully account for. And in a story where the physics are built around the will, the person with the stronger will tends eventually to prevail. The second rule is the rule of inheritance. What matters persists. Power reincarnates into the nearest fruit. The goal persists in the person who takes up the goal of the person who could no longer pursue it. The sword carries the swordsman's ambition forward into the hands of the student. The hat travels from bearer to bearer, carrying the same commitment across each transfer. The rule of inheritance is the mechanism by which everything in the story that matters survives the death of the person who carried it, finding a new bearer, continuing through a new person, arriving eventually in the hands of the person who can complete what the previous person could not. The rule of inheritance is what makes time irrelevant to the story's deepest arguments. The truth is 800 years old, and it is arriving now, carried forward through every person who ever preserved a fragment of it, in the hands of the people who are finally positioned to act on it. The inheritance is the bridge between what was and what is coming. And what is coming was always the destination. The third rule is the rule of freedom. In One Piece, freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the presence of a will large enough to make constraint irrelevant. This is the specific definition that Luffy demonstrates through every fight, every arc, every refusal to accept the world's limits as his limits. He is not free because he is powerful. He is powerful because he is free, because his will does not acknowledge the ceiling that the world tries to impose. Because the rubber body that bounces back from every impact is the physical expression of a will that does not stay down. The rule of freedom explains why the story's antagonists, however powerful, eventually encounter the specific limit of what power without freedom can accomplish. It can win every fight except the one where what it is fighting is not a stronger power, but a will that was never going to accept losing, that is physically incapable of accepting losing, that does not have the category of losing available to it, because the category requires the acknowledgement of a ceiling, and Luffy does not acknowledge ceilings. 500 facts, 3 rules, 1 story. Tonight, we held 500 pieces of a world that contains more than any single reading can hold, and the 3 rules that connect them, and the 1 story that they are all telling from 500 different angles. The geography is the story of a world that was broken and has not yet been repaired. The fruits are the story of a will that persists past the death of the person who held it. The Haki is the story of a life force that exists in everything and that most people never learn to use. The institutions are the story of the people who won and what they built and what they are afraid of losing. The crews are the story of people who chose each other and what the choosing meant. The characters are the stories of every person who ever loved something badly enough to organize their entire life around it. And all of these stories, held together, are the single story. That what matters persists. That the will finds a new bearer. That the truth travels forward through whoever carries it toward the moment when it can finally be known. that the person who can complete what Joy Boy began is still sailing, still laughing, still carrying forward everything everyone who loved him left behind. The story is not finished, but it is moving toward its end. And the end, when it comes, will be the moment when 500 facts and 200 connections and 30 years of chapters all converge into the single recognition that the story was always building toward. We will be there. The night is long enough to reach it. Good night.